Posted here before, and while unfortunately I was smart in my previous experiences, apparently that sense of preservation didn't follow me into my teen years. To be fair, this is long. Anyways, when I was about 16, my best friend, we'll just call her C for privacy purposes, and I met a guy at the park one night whom we ended up hanging out with for the summer and the following years. We'll call him Jay. Jay was a teen illegal, which was relevant only because the apartments he lived in were literally all illegals except for this one white guy, who wasn't exactly great himself. So, C and I had become accustomed to showing up at the apartments at all random times, and half of the complex knew us, but they only knew us as Jay's white girls. Nothing we took offence to, since the majority of the time we were given free drinks and bud just to chill with these guys, most of whom were older but pretty chill. That is, until Caesar. This guy was 38 years old, easily 6+ feet, and tiny/wiry looking, but stronger than he looked. For that I'm definite. My first time meeting him was just past my 16th birthday, when he had invited Jay and his cousins to come to my mum's while she was out for the day to drink and hang out. He gave Jay a ride, and when we came outside to say hi and bring the guys in, Caesar just stood back, just grinning this creepy ass grin. That's when Jay said, "Hey, Harley Quinzel, he just wants to fuck you since he gave us a free ride." I just laughed too, like, what the fuck? I thought it was a joke, but they kept persisting, and finally I got pissed and yelled, "Fuck you guys, I'm not a whore," and went back inside. Caesar got mad, cussing, and finally got back in his car, slamming the door shut and peeling out. Obviously not a great first impression. So a couple of months later, during a school break, probably summertime since it was pretty easy to pull the flip on our parents, saying I was just staying at C's house and she was staying at mine, we decided to head to the apartments. We went up to Jay's first, but he wasn't home, so we went to one of the other guys' places that we knew. Guess who lived there? Yep, Caesar. I went to leave, but then he told C that Jay and the other guys knew we were coming and went to the store, so to come in and chill till they got back. He mentioned us inside, introduced his friends, and mentioned a pack of 30. Of course, being the dumbass teens that we were like, okay. And I figured since we had C's brother with us, I'll just call him A. We figured had protection and we'd be just fine. At first, everything was fine, but I kept getting creepy vibes and would catch Caesar just staring at me. Caesar kept commenting on what a pretty girl I was, and look at her hair and them nice breasts. I was wearing a short cut jean skirt and a super low cut shirt, cause to be honest I hella digged Jay at the time. I kept getting more and more weirded out until finally I said fuck it, let's go, and waited for Jay and the rest to come back later. Immediately he got mad again and stormed off to the room calling me a bitch and tease and some other shit in Spanish that I didn't understand. I got up to leave and his friend, whose name I don't remember, told us to calm down and we could go to his other friend's apartment in the same complex to wait for Jay. Did I mention teens are extremely stupid? We agreed and went across the walkway to the other apartment. The men there were younger and actually a lot of fun. I finally relaxed and ended up sharing some tequila with a guy who was closer to my age, so like 18, 19. We were all taking pictures, just having a good time really. A, who was supposed to be our protection, and look out for us, got trashed and ended up using the bed in one of their rooms to sleep in for a bit. Everything was fine, but it was pushing 2 a.m. and the guys wanted to get more alcohol before they stopped selling it. So they left us in their apartment and said they'd be right back. It was cool. They were nice, right? I decided to lay on the bed to talk to A to see if he was sobering up. He had been lying the traditional long way, so I lay crossway on my stomach with my legs dangling over the bed, with my arms stretched in front of me by his legs, trying to tap him to get him to respond. He was out cold. The next thing I knew, the light was turned off, and I heard the door shut. I didn't think much of it, figuring that the guy had come back and thought I was asleep. That was until I felt my arm being grabbed and held down by somebody laying on top of me, using their legs to force mine apart. The next thing I knew, a hand was up my skirt, pushing, and I tried to get up. I pushed back down and could only smell sour breath. Before I could cry, scream, or say anything, the door flies open, the lights turn on, and the guy jumps off me. I turn around and see C standing there in the doorway yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" "Holly Quinzel, I need you now." She bursts into the room to grab me, and when I looked up, guess who? Turns out Caesar had seen the guys leave but without us, and came over to realise the door was unlocked. C saw him enter the room as she was coming out of the bathroom, and bust in because she knew he was a creep. Just as he goes running out of the apartment, the other guys come back, see him running, see me crying and shaking, and they put 2 and 2 together. 2 of them, including the younger one I was talking to all night, chased him back down, pounding on the door, screaming about killing him, and he's better not to come out, amongst other things. They finally come back, calm me down and get the story. Younger guy wants to go back with a weapon and I beg everybody to drop it. Finally, Jay and the guys were waiting on comeback, but end up taking to Caesar first. They weren't actually aware we were coming, and the best part is, they blamed me for what he did, and then got mad that we were at somebody's apartment that we didn't know. What the fuck? I stopped hanging around with them shortly after that, but I was never comfortable going near those apartments again. So to Jay, Caesar and all the others, please let's not meet again, because next time I might not have somebody watching my back. This happened to me just about 2 hours ago, around 4:30 a.m, and I can't get back to sleep. Every creak or drip now makes me jump. I only stopped trembling about 20 minutes ago. So, I was asleep on my friend's couch and woke up to the sight of someone opening their front door. They may have said something to me through the crack, or something or other, but I just know that it was the door that woke me up. This tall, very slender lady in a long red/salmon coloured dress, or something, poked her head through the door and started to move towards me. I tried to pretend to still be asleep, but once she knelt down next to me, I knew the jig was up. I fully opened my eyes and looked over at her, trying to make out her face. She just put her hand on my shoulder and started asking me questions that I really didn't understand. The sentences just seemed jumbled and incoherent, despite the fact that she was speaking English, the only language that I know. She was holding a couple of papers. Almost seemed like she was trying to ask me some kind of questions of it. I sat up and asked why she just walked inside, and she said she was from some department or something and asked for my name. I didn't respond and just kind of looked around. I debated calling out my friends or just doing a runner to one of their rooms, but I feared for my physical safety. I grabbed my phone to call one of them after the most awkward 30 seconds of silence, and she just told me, "I can see you're not ready yet. It's okay," and touched my arm and calmly walked out. I saw her walk towards the street from the window. I immediately made sure that all the doors were locked, as these friends usually don't lock up, which I'm sure is just about the only way she managed to walk in. In sheer shock, I tried to wake my friends up via phone and just sat on the couch waiting for my heart to stop racing, or at least slow down. After 15 minutes, I went upstairs and woke them up. The friend I know better, Max, thought it was weird but was mostly concerned. He apologized that this happened to me and went back to bed. The other friend, Brock, emphasized that I was so freaked out. We sat in the stairwell for a bit before he went back to bed. I'm now on the couch, but I don't know how to sleep anymore. I've never felt more frightened or unnerved. So when I was very young, my parents left me to kindergarten or a daycare centre. My dad worked at the MFA and my mum worked as a secretary at a private organisation. One day, the kindergarten's doorbell was rung by a man, which said that my dad had sent him for me to be picked up. He said he worked for the ministry and gave my name to the principal. The principal asked for his ID but was refused it by the stranger, who said that it was in his car and he would go and get it and return quickly. He never come back. When my mum came a few hours later to pick me up, the principal called her into her office and started lecturing her about their policies on how the kindergarten only delivers the kids to their parents and no one else, and told my mum not to send anyone again. My mum, in total shock, said that she didn't send anyone. A few questions that show how creepy this is 1. How did they know my name? They did not get it from any kid. They went after me. 2. How did they know my dad worked for the MFA? 3. How did they know where the kindergarten I was sent to was? The only thing I can think is that we were followed around for a while. The thing that really spooks me out: what would my life be like if I was handed over to this stranger? 2011, the date of the royal wedding. My best friend's family had a party to celebrate. She lives 10 doors down from me in a quiet, secluded street. To set the scene, my town was built as London Overflow. They'd built the estate I live in during the early 60s, basically in the middle of a field. They'd planned to extend the town but never got planning permission, so it was very isolated and quite desirable. Nothing bad ever really happened here, ever. It reaches about 9 PM and my other friends decided she wasn't going to stay as originally planned and decided to go home. After ringing her dad and realising he'd had a drink to celebrate the wedding, we decided to walk her home. Her house was about 2 miles from mine, on the outskirts of another estate. Quite a simple walk, over some fields, farmland, etc., and then through a very small wooded area. We walked the land many times. We tell my friend's parents, who are hosting the party, the situation, and we all leave. Everything was fine until I was about halfway up this field. I started to feel like I was being watched. But I'm very paranoid, and I'm only 15 years old at the time, so I totally ignored the situation. Wrong. As we continued, I hear the hum of a car engine and ask my friends if they hear it too, which one replies she does and the other replies to shut up and keep walking. We're now 3/4 over the field and probably under a mile from my friend's house when a pitch black car with windows tinted, black rims, tinted lights comes racing towards us. It had blacked out windows and no lights, so we obviously legged it down a ditch onto the next field before running into the woods. I stop and pant, watching the car. I then see 3 males exit the car and start down towards the ditch right at us. They see us jump the ditch and start running in our direction. We book it, get to my friend's house, lock the doors and explain to her intoxicated parents exactly what had just happened. Everyone rationalised that they were probably lost and we were rude. But I'll never shake the look on the passenger's face. Pure aggression. I can never understand why they didn't have their headlights on. It was a dark field and we didn't even notice them until they were basically on top of us. Needless to say, I stayed at my friend's house that night, never saw those freaks again, and never went to the police, although, now as I'm an adult, I realise that I probably should have. I'm a 24-year-old girl, but at the time of this story, I was about 16 and my younger sister was about 14. We were living in a pretty bad neighbourhood, along with my mother, just the 3 of us, as my 4 older brothers had moved away and my dad passed away 3 years prior. Though the house we lived in was old and kind of in bad shape, we kept it in a very clean/nice condition inside. It had its benefits though. It came with this huge backyard. I'm talking one of them full backyards complete with a garage-sized tool shed. Right at the end of our short metal fence, and on the other side of the fence was a large, unfenced plot of land that also belonged to us. We call it the back 40. Now my mum is not mentally all there. She has the mental and emotional capability of a 15-year-old girl, but she's stunningly beautiful. Few people notice she was also a bleeding heart, meaning basically that she is very trusting and wanted to save the world, while it's also not making very smart choices and putting her tiny 4'11", 90-pound self in danger, as well as me and my sister a lot. One of the people she consistently tried to save was her best friend, Karen. Karen was your typical white trash hardcore, drink a fifth of cheap vodka in the morning type of alcoholic. She'd show up at our place hammered a few times a week, sometimes for money/other things, but sometimes it was to hang out, to steal change off my dresser. You get the idea. Well, one day she shows up with a camper and a borrowed truck, she says. She tells my mum she needs somewhere to keep it because her new husband kicked her out. I immediately think it's bad. It looks like it hasn't been touched since the 1970s. It probably has rats and it's probably stolen, but my mum, the bleeding heart, says it's fine. You can park it behind the shed. I agree, because then it won't be an eyesore at least. Mistake number 1. She parks it in between the metal fence and the back of the shed, so just the very end of it and the hitch are visible from the front of the shed. We all kind of forget it exists for a few months. Then one day our cousin abandons a puppy at our house. It's a pit bull and it takes to us immediately. We love it unconditionally and he loves us back just as hard. We don't even mind that he barks at anyone walking by or any new people in the house. He usually barks, sniffs, then loves them anyway. We begin to feel kind of safe at the house, a feeling that I hadn't had since the last of my brothers left home. A few months later, it's summertime, and my mum is teaching summer school, so my sister and I are home alone. It's about noon and we decide to go sunbathing in our backyard. We toss on our bikinis, grab towels and lay out in the sun, reading, talking, bonding like only a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old can. But I start to feel uneasy. I almost feel as if we're being watched. I don't know why, but I just get the feeling that we should go inside. My sister is a very nervous girl sometimes, prone to crying and breaking down when she's spooked. And I don't really want to alarm her in case it's nothing, so I just tell her I'm hungry and we should go inside. She agrees quickly and I can tell she's rushing as she grabs her stuff. Fuck, she feels it too. Probably she doesn't want to seem like a baby though. We were basically running inside our house. Our kitchen is at the back of the house, with a big window above the sink. We stare out of it. We can see the whole backyard from there. As soon as we're inside, my sister asked if I felt like I was being watched. I said yes. We have a creepy neighbour who is in love with my mum, Karen's ex-husband, who sometimes creeps around the woods next door. My sister says maybe it's him. Normally I'd agree, but I knew he was currently in jail for arson. I started to get freaked out, and then, out of nowhere, in the corner of my eye, I see a flash of a man near the old camper behind the fence. It's so far away and he moves so quickly that I didn't get a good look. My sister sees it too and freaks out. Our pit bull is too short to see out the window, so he just sits calmly at our feet. My sister calls his name and, thinking quickly, lets him out the back. He goes bounding out, catching the scent of the intruder. Our view is blocked by the shed, but we lock the back door and crack the window open, and we sit and watch and listen to him barking viciously. Then we hear a man's voice saying something, then more barking, a struggle, then nothing. We can't see what's going on, but we're freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I run around and lock the front door, double check the windows and snap back to the window and snap the back window shut. I can't see my dog now and I can't hear anything either. My heart is pounding. In this kind of neighbourhood it takes the cops hours to get here. I'm stuck with the memory of calling 911 when my dad collapsed, before I knew he was dead as soon as he hit the floor. A massive heart attack. Telling the operators my dad was dying. It took them an hour to show up. What could some man do to us within an hour? I'm so scared because, above all else, I love my sister. I grab a steak knife from the counter and hide the rest in a drawer. My sister comes bounding down the stairs, already on the phone, telling the operator what's going on. I tell her to go sit in the living room, try to see if the neighbours are outside, maybe flag one. All of a sudden, our dog comes bounding around the side of the shed, happy and calm. I can see the back door from the window and I check to see if it's clear. He reaches the back door and I let him in, slamming the door shut behind him. My sister comes running across to examine if the dog's been hurt. What we see at that moment still makes me nauseous to think about. We look at each other, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. Is that white stuff what I think it is on his face? I threw up in the sink. That answers her question. I lift my forehead from the sink and out the window. I see a man jump the fence towards the back 40, away from us, taking off into the woods. My sister's still on the phone, doesn't mention what we found on my dog's face, out of embarrassment, out of fear, maybe because she was scared to admit what she saw. I don't know. Those are the reasons I didn't mention it to the cops who show up 45 minutes later. I'm assuming her reasons were similar. The cops checked through the woods, but the guy was long gone. They checked the shed, but it had obviously not been entered for years. Finally, they checked the camper. Somebody had been living in there for a while. Clothes, CDs, a CD player, dog toys, food, and other drug-related items were found inside. The dog toys explained how that the guy was able to calm a dog just long enough that he wouldn't mess with him. Police said it was a harmless drifter looking for a place to live and told us to get rid of the camper, and we did, that day. I'd like to say to my mum that she had learned a lesson, but she didn't. I did. I live in a house compound, and one day, me and my family were visiting a friend's house. After a couple of hours, my mum and my mum's friend asked us to go and fetch something from my house. So we go back to my home, which is a long way from his house, and the walk seemed uncomfortable. It was long and it just had this creepy, eerie atmosphere to it for some reason. After ages of walking, we reached my house and we got the thing that we needed, which was inside the house. So I unlocked the door and got the object, and I noticed the bathroom door was lit and exhaust fan was on, which I usually always turned off. But I didn't give that any attention and thought my dad was in the toilet, since he wasn't in my friend's house when we left. So me and my buddy decided to wait outside the house for my dad to finish, and I occasionally went to the small window outside the bathroom and called for my dad, but I didn't get any answer. But I did hear someone humming and singing, so I thought he was just having a good time. After a good hour and a half passed, I started to feel uneasy and told my friend we had to leave because their parents were probably pissed now. When we arrived at his house, we were shocked to see my dad sitting there and talking with my friend's parents. We asked him where you had gone, and he said, "I didn't go anywhere, I just stayed here since we first come here." This made me scared because my family was at his for 3 hours and we just waited for my dad. I go to ask my sister the same question and I get the same response. Someone was surely in the bathroom, right? After the visit is done, we go back home just to find the front door, which I unlocked, and the bathroom door was wide open. My family acted normally, but I was completely freaking out, and it's safe to say that I couldn't sleep that night. This is another story that happened in college, during my final year in college. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on campus with 4 other girls. My actual roommate, Christine, is a sweetheart, and we're like sisters now. After 10 years of friendship, that was our 3rd year rooming together. We even signed up for the same summer abroad programs. All the other suite/apartment mates were, well, interesting. The other 2 girls sharing our apartment was Chelsea and Brittany. Chelsea was normal, but Brittany was problematic. She would always bring different guys home every night, which was fine, except for the fact that she was in a relationship with a cop who carried a gun everywhere with him and had a serious anger and jealousy issue. The night the incident happened, there was a St. Patrick's Day party with 3 concerts happening in the school, so there were loads of people on campus. Brittany and Chelsea have gone off to party, but Christine and I decided to stay at home to binge on Friday reruns. In the middle of our friends' binge season, we hear someone hammering at our door. "Hey, can you let me in? I need to borrow your phone." It's a male voice. We immediately assume it was one of Brittany's guys. Sometimes they would make up stories just to get into our apartment, then refuse to leave until she comes back so they could hook up. "What should we do?" Christine whispered to me. I knew what she wanted, but she was too nice to say it. So I said it for her. "Let's pretend we're not in and not answer, right?" We were in no good mood to entertain a guy for a few hours while he waited for Brittany to get back. The guy banged on the door and asked to borrow our phone several more times, but eventually he gave up and left. We had fun watching the rest of the episode when our phones buzzed, and it was an automatically generated campus-wide alert text. There was a stabbing in the campus. It was on our very apartment and happened in the unit right above ours. The stabber was an unidentified male. He was still on the loose. I had just looked at Christine in shock and asked her, could it be? She looked unsure but went, "No, it couldn't." Yeah, it couldn't have been. We made sure we barricaded the door shut to our room before we slept that night though, in case Brittany brought Mr. Stabby home. I mean, she doesn't have the best taste in men. The next day, we read the school paper to find out more about the incident. Apparently, the guy knocked on the victim's door asking to borrow her phone. She let him in, and as soon as he was inside the apartment, he grabbed the knife from the kitchen countertop, stabbed her multiple times in the stomach. He was a complete stranger, and it seemed that his only motivation is to stab someone. Since the campus was filled with thousands of people during the party, the guy easily slipped into the crowd and disappeared. Our apartment was on the ground floor and right next to the stairs. If someone was going to knock on every apartment, ours would most likely be right before the victim's apartment. Christine and I definitely spent a few minutes shouting, "Holy shit! Holy shit! Oh my god!" and other things like that. Turns out, having a shitty apartment mate may have actually saved us. Yes, there was an article on this in the news. Here's a detail that isn't in the article. The apartment was Levy 6. If you're a fellow Lion during that time, you'd remember that it was a month after there was a shooting over a high school basketball game hosted on campus. Fortunately for me, I was graduating in 2 months, so my mum couldn't pull me out of LA and make me move back to Indonesia ASAP. Yes, my mum received the alert too, knew our apartment's layout, and so she also pieced everything together and realised that it could have easily been me or Christine. So I never really told this story because of the fact that it's pretty close to a lot of fictional stories that exist. Maybe the concept is creepy. Maybe this event was the basis for these stories. I don't really know. I just know that it's completely true. I was shown the newspaper clippings from the event when I was a kid even. It was the late 60s when this took place, so it was quite a long time ago. It happened to my father when he was a boy. They had a swing set in their backyard. He would often wake up earlier than everyone else and go outside and play in the morning. So there was nothing too strange that morning when they heard him getting up, going outside to play in the creek or the swing set. This morning though, my father opened the back door and ran outside into the foggy mist. He stopped in his tracks though, as he noticed a hunched over figure gently swaying on one of the swings. It was a little old lady. In his Polish household, they called her a babushka, because a babushka the old ladies tied around their head. She clutched in her arms a little brown paper bag. They were out there for some time when finally my grandpa woke up and went to get a glass of water. As he sat there at the sink, he looked out of the window over the kitchen sink and saw them in the backyard. The woman was clearly talking to my father. She whispered something in his ear and he got up to go to the door. The woman got up behind him and proceeded to follow. My grandfather went to the door and opened it and stood there, letting his son pass him as he stared at the woman. As I am told, she stopped in her tracks and turned around, sitting back on the swing. She smiled at him and started swinging again. He shut the door, locked it, and told my father to go to his room and then called the police. She sat there and waited. The entire time, she never left, just kept swinging as the police showed up and talked to her. Now, as you all know, because like I said, this is extremely similar to some creepypastas, when the cops looked in her bag, it was just literally knives and a rope. That was all. Like specialty knives. Knives for boning, carving, butchering. I was told this story by my grandfather when I was little, and I instantly told him I didn't believe him. As a young child, I didn't believe it at all, in fact. So he went out and fetched a yellowed newspaper clipping, showing me the extract from the newspaper. It had mentioned the lady, the knives, the rope, the swing set, everything. I had always thought it was weird later on in life, and I read similar stories. It seemed like a popular concept, but I knew it had to happen in real life. My father never really told anyone exactly what they talked about. He did admit that she had whispered to him as they got up, and she said something to the extent of going inside so that they could play with the whole family. He said nothing about anything else what was said, but they were going out for a while talking. My father died when I was 15. He was never in my life anyways, so I never really got any more details out of him. But my aunt and grandfather had told me the story many of times. My grandfather always seemed so nervous about it. He didn't like the way she looked or the fact that she just waited for the police. He said my grandmother called her Baba Jaga, which was like the old country demon old lady who ate children, which weirdly enough is where the word babushka comes from according to some. They took down the swing set and everything after that, and my father wasn't allowed to go out and play on his own in the mornings ever again. It was probably the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life, and it's been a story that stuck with me since I was a young child. One of those memories that no matter how old you get, it stays with you vividly. Early fogs in the morning have creeped me out every time. I'm always waiting to see her. Always. For background, I have worked for a merchandising company that is hired by Kroger for the last 4 or so years on and off. A lot of my family works for this company. My parents are supervisors for employees on my level and have multiple stores that they oversee, and everyone loves them. So, at my store, I like to take smoke breaks with other employees and try to make friends. It makes my job easier for Kroger people to like me, so I did my best to come out of my shell. One of these people was an old produce manager. We would talk every couple of days about work stuff and books we liked, while I had no interest in being his friend. Small talk was fine with me. He starts asking me if I like writing and wants to obsessively talk about poetry and love, and I'm starting to get uncomfortable by how often he seeks me out. One day, he asked if I'd critique some poetry he had written. He'd always ask his wife, but as I see, it's not something he can really show her. All I can think is, oh, fucking great. I say I really don't think I'm the person to talk to. I don't have any qualifications, just anything that's nice, but it's still a no because I'm not a confrontational person at all. I was 17 at the time and I've learnt since. Anyway, he shoves multiple straight up nasty pieces of torn up dirty paper into my hands anyway, and struts off at a high speed. In hindsight, like how a little boy would give his first crush a note that says, "Will you go out with me?" with a yes/no, then dash away to avoid the fallout. I kind of already know, but it's like turning away from a car crash. You can't. So I'm standing there in an aisle of Kroger in broad daylight trying to decipher his terrible kindergarten handwriting. She doesn't know how beautiful she is, how he wants to caress her face, how she doesn't even know what she's worth. A lot about her eyes. So I'm getting chills thinking about the fact that this man in his 60s is spending time off work thinking about me enough to write pages about me. It's the first time in my life that I felt immediately and legitimately in danger. Not because he's interested, but because he was spending this much of his time thinking about me. I've had older men ask me for my number before, and that never bothered me much before because it was a fleeting lapse in their judgment over as soon as I said no. This, however, has been going on for God knows how long. So I went straight home early that day and showed my parents the papers, and I knew they could do something about it. My stepdad was pissed. He was so pissed. I instantly felt safer even though he was still at work the next day, because he never looked me in the eye again. He actively avoided me. I quit that store a few days later, so I don't ever know what happened to that guy, but it still makes me shiver when I remember this. Someone can be thinking about you this way for days, weeks, months, and you could never know it until they literally act on it. I'm just glad Harry chose to write about it instead of doing something worse. I don't dress up for work anymore. This is a true story about one of my most terrifying experiences I ever had in my life. It was most especially disturbing considering my age at the time of this encounter with someone who was the most likely a paedophile with bad intentions. I'm from Canada and generally feel very safe where I live. However, I lived less than 15 minutes away from the home of two of the most notorious serial killers in Canadian history, Robert Pickton and Clifford Olson. Knowing that, it's safe to say that there is a history of crime where I live. Just because those two horrible people were put in jail before this happened, doesn't mean evil doesn't exist, as I learnt, so here is how it all happened. After leaving my friend's house in the winter time around 10 o'clock at night, I slowly made my way home, walking through the dark empty streets of our peaceful neighbourhood. Her parents weren't very responsible and were drunk too, so they couldn't drive me home, but to be honest, I wanted to walk because I didn't want to go home right away. My parents trusted me and never would have thought that I could be in danger. I just turned 11 and was wearing little pink sneakers, my brother's hoodie, my blonde hair in braids. I walked calmly and proudly, dragging my brother's scooter behind me. I told myself that there wasn't anything to be afraid of. I didn't look it, but I was a pretty fearless child. I thought that I was tough back then. Since I wasn't in any rush to get home and be told by my mother I was going to bed, I paused and admired the silence. I took a deep breath, inhaling the air, exhaling and creating fog with my breath. After a while, I picked up the pace and continued towards my street. Through the fog, I could almost see where I had to turn onto my street. The peaceful moment was suddenly disturbed by the sound of a pickup truck driving past me, definitely above the speed limit. About a minute later, the peaceful moment was suddenly disturbed by the sound of a pickup truck driving past me, definitely going above the speed limit. About a minute later, I heard a slow-moving vehicle engine behind me, but I didn't think anything of it at first. That was until I turned around. Strangely, there was the same red pickup truck that had drove past me a few minutes ago. It would have had to have gone all the way round the block to end up behind me so quickly again. Uncomfortably, I grabbed my brother's scooter tightly and put one of my feet on it as I dragged the other. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, so I didn't get on it straight away. I felt the truck getting closer, approaching me from behind. Then my stomach began to hurt and I started getting chills. I had this intense gut feeling that I needed to get away from this man who was lurking behind me in his truck as fast as possible. I didn't look behind me again. I jumped on the scooter and raced onto my street, my feet slapping the ground as I launched myself. As the wheels slipped a little bit on the frosty pavement while I rode off, I panicked, screaming a little bit every time the scooter wobbled. I picked up quite a bit of speed, my eyes watering from the freezing cold wind as it blew furiously in my face. My stomach lurched when I heard the car engine roar. He stepped on the gas and sped towards me. The fear that he was following me had now been confirmed. Tears fell from my eyes as I flew down the street like a bullet. Luckily, I could see my house. Slightly relieved, I prepared to jump off and sprint inside. I looked over to see him, right beside me, staring. It was difficult to see what he looked like, other than that he had a beard and was wearing a white hat. But I will never forget his eyes. They stared at me in the most horrifying way. I turned around, I couldn't look at him. It was just unbearable. Now, I slammed on the brakes, skidding on the icy roads as I was thrown off my scooter. I frantically tossed it on the front yard and bolted. I let out a gigantic scream as I sprinted up to my front door. Thankfully, it was unlocked, so I ran inside, slammed the door behind me, locking it immediately. Screaming for my parents, I ran down to them so fast that I practically fell down the stairs. I tried to tell them everything that happened, but I was breathing so heavily they could barely understand me. Finally, they figured out what was happening and went upstairs with me. When they looked out the window, the red pickup truck was still in front of the house. My parents angrily went outside to confront the driver, but as soon as he saw them, he sped off even faster than he did when he was chasing me. I wondered why he was still there 3 minutes later. Was he waiting for me to come back? Because why would I? Was he writing down my address? I don't know. I probably don't want to know. Someone who is messed up enough to follow a screaming and obviously uncomfortable 11-year-old girl home clearly wasn't there to check if I got home safe. I'm happy to say that I never saw that creepy red pickup truck ever again. But this terrifying encounter sure kept me awake at night, wondering what would have happened if I wasn't fast enough. My bedroom faced the same street where I fell off my scooter trying to get away from him. I always worried from that day on that he would come back and would try to get inside my room. So, to the twisted, horrible man who chased me in his car following me home, let's not meet, ever. This story is from the earlier years in my childhood. Between the ages of 9 and 11, I lived in town, and while I missed living on acreage, it was really great because my sister and I lived within walking distance of 2 playgrounds, next door to my brothers and down the street from another pair of sisters who all played at the same playground. Being the oldest by at least 4 years, I was often tasked with fetching them, or if I was bored, as I didn't have any other friends at that time, I'd end up playing with the small group. Now, I will quickly also mention that our driveway was bordered by a large white picket fence that belonged to the house next to us. There were also 2 Rottweiler pitbull crosses that would bark loudly at whoever was on the other side of the fence. Our neighbours were, at first, I thought, quiet, who didn't like talking to kids, but back then it was also a little more obvious that I had autism. Thus, I also thought they were worried about upsetting me, as some people are. I couldn't have been more wrong. Our first bad encounter was when we were coming home and pulled into our driveway. I had just attended my first day of soccer and was getting out on the side where the fence was. One of the dogs lunged and started to bark. I remember screaming and I started to cry as this hurt my ears. I wasn't really terrified of dogs, and the guy who was in the back and smoking asked my mother to control her retarded daughter. This really ticked her off, and she told him to control his out-of-control dogs before entering the house. The man of the house I never really saw, but when I did, I instantly didn't like him. He was tall, bony, with long stringy hair and a beard. His girlfriend, I think it was, had those red press-on nails and was always chewing gum. Our neighbours didn't like me for whatever personal reason, I don't know, but they always called me a retard when they saw me. I could just go past on my bike and be riding by and I'd hear, "Go back inside, retard." Yes, those were our neighbours. We still are Christian, but my parents didn't appreciate them one bit. I still didn't understand why they're insulting me. I didn't know what retard meant until later, so I just ignored them. Things slowly escalated as our lawn ornaments were stolen, rocks were thrown at our truck in the middle of the night, and loud honking that would wake me up at 2 a.m. These guys once had a party and some drunken person tried to enter our house. I wish I could say this was all what happened, but this is a scary part. We owned a dog ourselves, a golden retriever black lab mix named Mandy. Mandy is a sweetheart and is very nice to people and seems a bit stupid to us at times. She's still with us and I love her because she's brilliant in her own way and likes me. I used to take her for walks almost every day back then when I felt safe. The small group of us had been walking home but decided to split up and go to different houses for lunch. So while the brothers went with the sisters to their house, I cut down the alleyway that would lead to our fenced-in backyard. We were no more than 2 houses away when we heard loud barking from one of the Rottweiler pit bulls. We weren't bothered and just kept a tighter leash on Mandy because she started to yank towards the source of the noise. Suddenly, the fence gave and the neighbour's dog was out and coming right towards us. Mandy wrenched herself free just then and lunged at the dog, and the two got into a horrible fight. We ran, screaming for our dad, and he told us to go and wait inside. I learned this later, that when we got there, our neighbour was in the back porch, watching. We didn't notice him before. We still don't know how long he was out there. Just that he was just watching the dogs fight while my dad, the hero he is, tore them apart and kicked the offending dog, who ran back into the yard. Mandy had to go to the vet for stitches, and to this day she's missing fur on the muzzle where the dog attacked her. I still remembered what I overheard him saying. "They're attacking dogs, man. Your girls, that mutt, were trespassing, so they had every right to attack them." Now please, bear in mind that we were in the alleyway, that's public property. My dad threatened to call the police and have his dogs put down, and that got him to fix the fence. To this day, I still wonder if he had intentionally been out there and watching his dog the entire time. I'll never know, as his girlfriend was arrested for possessing cocaine, and he gave the dogs to an animal shelter and put the house up for sale before moving out. I don't live in that town anymore, nor have any contact with other neighbours, so I don't know what come of them. But either way, psycho neighbours with too many screws loose, let's never meet again. So, to set the stage, I'm dicking around trying to figure out what I want to do in my life. My uncle has this shitty little 1-bedroom house that he lets me stay in for basically a pittance in rent. Me and my shitty little retail job has never heard anything better, so I move in. Literally, the first 10 minutes I'm here, creep number 2 pops out of his house, one over across from mine. Think Mr. Heckles from Friends, but tan and bald on top. And I guess an unaccompanied female was just too much for this guy to resist. He started talking before he was all the way across the street. Just this constant stream of talk that kind of runs into itself. I think he was talking about people that lived in the neighbourhood before. Anyway, he goes off on this long rant about how people who lived in the house before me bred pit bulls and let them tear up the lawn, and how he worked with the company to help him reseed the yard. I managed to not laugh as I tell him the owner, my uncle, has been the previous tenant, who owned 1 beagle, and that the lawn had never been torn up. I was kind of curious to how he'd react. The guy just blinked and gave this weird little sideways head shake and went off on another tangent. That would become all too familiar for me in the coming months. This guy would never admit to a lie. Just start off on another one. Anyway, at that point, my crew showed up and we did some righteous moving. I noticed that Heckles popped back into his house as soon as the males showed up, something that will become very familiar to me in the coming months. Heckles would never knock on my door to see if I was in. He would stand at my front window with his face right up against the glass and his hands around his face. Creepy. Anytime I was out and unaccompanied, he would whip out of his house and come over to me, talking constantly. It was more annoying than scary at this point. The dude just had an idea that I was this young, naive girl that needed his advice. Problem was, I wasn't. And what's more, his advice was always wrong. He would always tell me things like refrigerator bulbs couldn't be replaced. So he would help me remove the back paneling on my refrigerator and swap it out. Or he would tell me to do flat out illegal things like pour motor oil down the drain. Well, about this time I got together with my on again off again guy friend. That's when it took a turn for the creepy. The dude turned from advice to complaints. He'd show up at 9 at night complaining my dog was barking. I'd be like, what the fuck? What dog? And I started finding all these little things amiss around the house. My outside faucet would be on when I went out in the morning. My mail would accidentally wind up at his place, even though it had not appeared to have ever happened before. Once I nearly shit myself when I came home from work and found the front door unlocked. Nothing was missing though. But all my cushions were rearranged and there was a glass in my dish drainer that wasn't there when I left. When I was outside with a man, even if it was one of my relatives, Heckles would sit on his porch and glare. The last straw was when he slashed my tyre. I had no idea what set this tantrum off. I guess it was because my boyfriend spent the night. When I stepped out for work the next morning, I noticed my truck was at a distinct angle. Before I even got all the way to the truck, Heckles was out of his house and legging it fast over to my house. He was trying to tell me about a girl he knew who had her tyres slashed in the exact same way. That's about all I could extract from it. I was at the end of my patience and was like, fucker, I know it was you. He blinked and did a head shake and started off, telling me how he was going to change the tyre. I yelled at him. At this point I was fucking frantic. I knew how to change the tyre on my own goddamn car. Well, my boyfriend heard the yelling and come out, so Heckles scurried away to his burrow. I called my uncle after letting work know why I had to miss a day, because I wanted out of that place. My uncle told me to hang on and that no less than an hour later, he would be over with his tallest son. My uncle wanted to talk to the guy directly and get him off my back. He had locked up the house renter and surprise surprise, it wasn't Heckles. My uncle had the idea that if he threatened him with eviction, he would back off. So my uncle made a big show of walking over there, knocking on the door, no dice. He hollered at me to call the cops, all bluff. He wasn't going to let the cops in on something as juicy as this. Heckles finally opened the door and asked what he wanted, totally innocent. My uncle said, "You're not the renter here." I looked it up. Heckles looked down at the ground and his reaction still blows me away. "Please don't tell anybody." So as it turned out, Heckles had known the guy renting the house since before he went in the mental hospital. You heard right, mental hospital. Heckles got out and his family had cut contact, so he decided to hit up the guy for a place to stay. Turns out that the guy had a stroke at some point and wound up in hospital. So Heckles was basically squatting in the place. Well, when my uncle was done, the guy never wanted to go near me again. I knew he got results, but I still wish he had called the cops because, for all I know, Heckles is still out there. somewhere, waiting for another unsuspecting target. I first moved out of my parents' house in 2008. I was 20. I had a 2-year-old daughter, and gosh darn it, I wanted to assert my independence and prove that I wasn't living with my parents because I couldn't live on my own. Overall, it was a relatively dumb idea. I moved to a cool part of town, if you will, next to campus, next to one of our arts districts, but in a really beautiful neighbourhood I always wanted to live in, but it was about 15 minutes away from the suburb that my parents lived in. And since I worked nights, I'd spend way too much time driving back and forth so my mum could babysit on the nights that I worked. Despite the inconvenience, the neighbourhood did not disappoint. I was in a small apartment building right in the middle of a beautiful Victorian housing district. Houses that sell from upwards of at least $1 million. Lovely neighbourhood, quiet area. No problems with anyone ever. It felt really safe. There was a neighbourhood watch and everything. I think there was only one incident of a car break-in that happened 2 years prior, and even then they just hit the cars that were unlocked. No damage, no windows smashed, nothing. This story takes place right around the end of my second year there. 2 years of nothing remarkable, other than the car break-ins. Around May of 2010, I was outside cleaning the glass on the door and the windows, and decobwebbing the cheap black iron patio furniture that I got from Target. The windows were tall. I am short. In order for me to clean the upper portions of the window, I had to stand on one of the chairs and reach. That's when I noticed something. Lip prints. Well, just one set of lips, on the window. Pretty high up too. I couldn't have reached them if I wasn't on a chair. At this time, I was mostly annoyed, thinking that maybe my neighbour had friends over and one of his drunk friends kissed my window. Because who else would be near my window? After that, I always made a point to see if the lips showed up again. They didn't, so I continued with my work and just thought it was my drunk neighbour. This is where everyone groans and rolls their eyes. Trust me. I know, I was young and dumb, but even that's no excuse, because where I lived, neighbourhood-wise and within the building, there were plenty of nights I'd leave the blinds open, and not only that, but the way the apartment was set up in an L shape, living room and kitchen and all the bedrooms in a straight line back, and then the bathroom off to the side of the bedroom. My daughter's bed was more towards the inside of the bedroom and mine was up the end, kind of in a straight line back. I liked the way the lights would come on through the trees in the morning. It was really beautiful to see and I loved waking up to it. I know it was a dumb choice. And here's another thing that makes me want to curl up and die. Many nights my daughter, at this point in the story she's 4 years old, would sleep in my bed until she didn't, which was probably around the 4th of July, if I remember correctly. She attributed this that the tall man watches me sleep. I don't like it. But in my defense, this kid was known for saying some really creepy shit. One time she told me of a ghost of a baby pig. The baby pig ghost would walk to her and he was sad because people tore him apart. And she was sad because the other ghost pigs didn't want to hurt me. So her saying something like this that was super creepy, I didn't really think much of it. I didn't think there was literally a tall man watching us sleep. But to appease her, and because I was thoroughly creeped out by what she said, I'd leave the blinds down at night. Most nights I was up until 3 or 4 because of my work schedule. I figured she was just being weird again, but that imagery sticks with you, I guess. And on to the night that put me in therapy and turned me into the most paranoid person you could ever meet. It was early August. I was asleep in my bed. I went down pretty early. My bedroom door was open and I always liked it that way. I was asleep facing the living room like I always did. The blinds were closed and down, like they had been for a month or so. But the string was wonky, so one proportion of the blinds always had about half an inch or two of free space from the windowsill. All the lights inside were off, but the patio light outside was on. I randomly woke up and looked down at my phone to see what the time was. Just a few minutes after 3. I was annoyed. There's no way I was going back to sleep. And that's when I saw it, outside the window. I saw the silhouette of a tall person through the blinds. He was standing so still for so long that I started to think I was going crazy. I thought I was seeing things. And that's when he sat in one of the chairs outside. I was completely frozen in sheer terror. I couldn't move a muscle. Texting or calling for help seemed out of the question. I was afraid he'd see the light from my phone or hear me, but then again, he sat there for so long that I convinced myself it was just a shadow or nothing was there. And then again, he moved. He stood back up and turned around. He stepped closer to my window and paused. He got right up to the window and paused again, and that's when he leaned over and was looking through the 2 inches of space between the blinds and the windowsill. He stood there for longer than seemed feasibly possible, in a bent over position. His head didn't move, not one bit. He just stood there looking in while I kept my eyes mostly shut. I thought if there was any way he could possibly see me with his eyes open looking at him, it'd make him snap and he'd burst in. Eventually he stood back up and walked out of view. Then I heard the screen door creak open. I can only assume that he tried the doorknob, but thankfully it wasn't so much of a stupid thing by me that I'd left my door unlocked. Then I heard the door shut again, and after there was nothing. After I had the door shut, I didn't see him come back to the window. I checked my phone, it was 3:48 AM. I quietly slid out of bed and crawled towards the bathroom and threw up. I waited until the sun come up before I called the cops. I can't explain why I was so afraid to move or make noise until then, but I was paralysed with fear in the bathroom until then. 2 officers showed up and I stepped outside to talk to them. It came as a little surprise to see that the lip prints were on the window again, roughly in the same spot. I have a photo, but at this point it's out of commission, so I can't access it right now. The police took their photos, the report was filed. I never slept there again. With the police report, I was able to cancel the lease renewal I had signed and move back with my parents. There is nothing too scary in my story, but I've been pretty shaken up by it. Here it goes. So I used to live in a pretty populated city. I lived with my family, my 2 dogs, my mum, my dad, my sister. We lived in a 2-story house in a suburb near the city. My dad worked downtown, so we were frequently down there. I should also mention that around the time of this story, I was about 8 or 9. This particular day, a Friday in the middle of summer, was just like any other normal day. My sister was sleeping over at her friend's house, and my mum and I had stayed home all day watching movies. This evening, we decided to meet my dad downtown and get some ice cream, since he was about to go off to work. To fast forward to about 3 hours later, it's about 9 or so, and it's dark out. Since my mum and I drove her car to meet my dad, and my dad had his own car, we were separated but arrived home at the same time. I was in my dad's car. My mum pulls into the driveway first. I noticed when her headlight shined onto our fence, the gate was wide open. We knew that for certain we'd shut it and locked it. My mum got out of her car and gasped. My dad stopped the car and we both got out. My mum was crouched down, checking the damage on the fence gate. Whoever broke in, we assumed, used some kind of tool to pry it open. Almost half of the boards on it were completely broke off or bent. The next thing I noticed was that one of our dogs were freaking the hell out. Then I realised the window by the door was broken. My heart dropped. Now, by this point, I was legitimately scared. My dad pulled out his pocket knife and went inside. I also grabbed my bat, which was under the porch. My mum just stood by the door begging my dad not to go in. He said call the cops, which she did. My dad and I slowly went into the house. The first thing we noticed was the little TV in the kitchen was gone. My dad swore under his breath. Now, I was more angry than scared. Whoever broke in had ransacked the whole house. That probably meant the living room TV and my PlayStation. I took a knife from the drawer and put it in my pocket just in case. I don't know why my dad didn't stop me since I was only 9, but I guess he didn't care based on the current situation. Still unnerved, my dad and I inched through the first floor of the house. We checked the living room. Of course, our main TV had been stolen. When we let out the dogs still freaking out in the front yard, the house was silent. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. But there were more than one pair. There were at least 2 pairs of these goons in the house. It sounded like they were in my parents' bedroom. Obviously, they knew we were home. They probably ran to a nearby closet to hide in. I grabbed my bat tighter. Whoever you are, I won't hesitate to blow your head off, my dad yelled up the stairs. I'd never seen my dad this angry before. My dad didn't actually own a gun. He obviously said that to make them scared, and it must have worked, because we heard the footsteps shift from the master bedroom to the other side of the house, which must have been either my sister's or my own room. Right about then was when we heard sirens approaching our house. I heard a very loud and distinct swear coming from upstairs. Once the police stepped out in front of our house, my mum came running into the room. I quickly told her that there were at least 2 goons hiding in our apartment upstairs, and that some of our stuff was stolen. Then we heard banging on the front door. Police. I rushed to the door to let them in. We have a call saying there's a break-in, he said. Yes, my mum said, crying. She said something along the lines of they broke in through the back while we weren't here. They're upstairs. There's a broke window and... We understand, we'll go check it out, said the cops. I suddenly felt safe. They went upstairs and not even a minute later we heard yelling of get down. Soon after, the cop had the 2 criminals handcuffed and were escorting them down the stairs. One of them looked to be in their mid-30s, had a long, unkempt orange beard and a moustache. I remember he was wearing a baseball cap and jeans. The other guy was even younger and dressed in all black and apparently wearing a ski mask. The cops told us that they were hiding in the closet in my room. They were also armed with pistols. We also learnt that everything they stole was in a large garbage bag, which they handed to us. But then many of my neighbours had gathered round the house trying to see what was going on. I distinctly remember the cops driving away with them in the back. The bearded one in the baseball cap gave me a blank, creepy stare that I don't think I'm gonna forget anytime soon. The thing that disturbs me most is to think of what would have happened if we didn't go out to get ice cream. Would they have broken anyway? Would they have killed us? How long had they been planning this for? It still sends creeps up my spine thinking of it today. The worst to think of is, what if me and my dad did pursue them up into the closet and not knowing that they had the guns? This happened about a year ago. A little information about myself. I'm a 19-year-old female and I am also very small. I'm about 4'11" and weigh 95 pounds soaking wet. My 11th grade year of high school is when this event took place. It is within the first 2 weeks of school and I was a bus rider. We had a new bus driver. Me being a very social person, I always thanked him for his service and was always super nice to him. I believe that's where I messed up. I was always one of the first to be dropped off, so when I realised I'd been taken on the bus for an extra 10 minutes, I was a little curious and just chalked it up to the fact that the bus routes get changed all the time. At this point, I've been on the bus for about 30 minutes and there were 2 kids left on the bus, with an old friend of mine and of course myself. This friend of mine lived in a very remote location and was absolutely not the kind of place that you would get cell phone reception. And so when we were dropped off, I couldn't call my parents to let them know what was happening. As soon as we were leaving this area, the bus driver pulled into a cemetery and told me to look out the window. When I did, I saw a torn baby deer. My whole body went into shutdown mode. I didn't know what to do. My initial reaction was to pull out my phone and call my parents when I remembered that I had no signal. I immediately got up and ran to the back of the bus. Keeping in mind, I'm the only kid on this bus. We sit by the deer for a good 10 minutes and the whole time I'm in the back and my blood is absolutely boiling. It was everything to me. It was hell. When we started to leave, he just started talking about random stuff like Harry loves his wife and Harry loves his new job as a bus driver. The whole time he's barely paying attention to the road. I get on my phone and go to Google Maps. Then I realised that my house was 15 minutes from where we were and I was super excited to get home. Boy was I wrong. This guy then decides to take a shit ton of back roads and keeps talking to me. So about 20-25 minutes later, I start seeing landmarks that are around my neighbourhood. I look down and there's service on my phone. I immediately call my dad. He doesn't answer. Not even 2 minutes later, we pull into my neighbourhood and he drops me off at my house. I took off running into my house. My parents were in there freaking out about where I was. My mum started grilling me about where I was and what I was doing. On a normal day I'd get home at 2:30, but today I was home at around 5 and my mum was very upset. My dad's phone was dead because he tried calling me so many times. I began to cry and tell them exactly what had happened. My dad was furious and called my school and used my mum's phone to record the whole conversation between my dad, the principal and myself. The principal was extremely pissed off about what had happened, as was my dad. My mother was just cuddling me, asking me if I was all alright. I didn't go back to school for about 2 days. There was no formal investigation, the school handled it themselves. The bus driver denies everything, and when they checked the camera footage, everything had been deleted. Thankfully, nobody believed the bus driver, and he was fired. I haven't ever rode the bus service since. I know that isn't as creepy as some stories, but it was just a bone-chilling experience for me. God knows what would have happened if he went really weird, and I was so young to be alone on a bus like that. Terrible.